Rest assured, all exercises will work if you do them properly. The amount of videos I see online of people being like, look at this new fancy exercise, it does X, Y, Z. It's like, this is not the issue people have. The issue is not the exercise is wrong. Honestly, most exercises you do will get you in great shape. It really is that simple. It's just the way you're doing them. That's the issue here. It's the way that people are training is the issue, not the exercise themselves. The exercises have been around for years and years and years for a reason. Now, and this is a good thing to understand about exercises. Most exercises that have been around for the longest period of time are done with dead weights, blunt objects. So we're talking dumbbells and barbells. Now, they've been around for the longest of time because they're easy to use. They're just dead pieces of weight, or they're easy to make. There wasn't fancy machines back in the day. It wasn't until like people started catching on about training, started developing these machines. Now, every time you use a dead piece of weight, what we want to understand is the resistance curve of the exercise. And this is not to get too science and fancy. It's just so when you use it, you understand where you should be feeling it. Because how many times have you done a flat dumbbell chest press, press the load up to the top and be like, I don't really feel this on my chest that much? It's like, obviously, you're not going to. It's a dead piece of weight that is running through your wrist joint, elbow joint and shoulder joint that are all stacked on top of each other, and then you have the floor underneath you. So there is no resistance. You could hold that there for ages. The same way, if you were to hang off a building, you would last a lot longer holding if your arms were directly straight than if they were bent, because your bicep would burn out because it's being taxed. Whereas if you just hold it in a straight arm position, you can hang there for a hell of a lot longer. Look at the way rock climbers will like base up on a wall for a little bit rather than just like, they're not going to hold it in this flexed up position. They're quite strong, but to be efficient, they wouldn't do. So whenever you are using something like a dumbbell on a flat chest press, whenever you're squatting with something like a barbell, granted, you could call this a machine, although it's just kind of like a fixed version of squatting with a backrest. Whenever you're doing a movement like that, it hits the muscle as the muscle gets longer. Why? Because the joints are furthest away from each other. So if we look here, as I press up, because of the load being here, specifically on the pad of my shoulders, and this runs through my hip joint, knee joint, and ankle joint, and they're all pretty much stacked on top of each other. Granted, the angle's slightly different. If anything, the angle's more forgiving on this specific exercise. So with it being like that, there's no real resistance at the top. The same way when you're doing a pressing exercise and your joints are stacked on a dumbbell, there's no resistance at the top. However, when you go down towards the bottom, now look at the distance between all of the joints. There's this much to go. Same with this joint here, the hip joint is completely closed. So that way they're all being loaded in the lengthened position, because the amount of knee bend here, the quad is being pulled over the knee joint, therefore max stretch. Because of the hip joint being fully closed up, the glute is being fully pulled over the hip joint, therefore at max stretch. Whenever something is at max stretch, it's loaded as much as it can be, and therefore it's taking the brunt of the exercise. So whenever you're doing an exercise with a dumbbell, with a barbell, with these beautiful exercises that have been around for the longest period of time, focus on where you should feel it, which is in the lengthened position. So when you're doing a flat dumbbell press, think about the downward phase of the movement. Think about pulling your pecs apart, pausing at the bottom and feeling the rip on your pec fibers, because you've pulled the load apart. You pulled your pecs apart with a heavy amount of load. Now when you press back up, that way you're just resetting so you can do that again. And this is why going steady on the way down is one of the key factors when it comes to developing some good muscle. I'm not saying you have to spend ages on the way down, but you have to be in control. You have to be stretching the muscle rather than just falling through the air. So if you look here as we come down, 3, 2, 1, stop for 1, back up. Always in control, lengthening the quads. Pause, stop for 1. So I'm all for intensity. I'm absolutely for intensity. Just if you get one thing right, just make sure you train hard. But if you can train hard whilst being in control of every repetition you're going to do, you're going to put mechanical tension on the muscle. And this is the problem when people don't focus on the way down. They'll just let the weight fall. The reason why, and I said like the most important thing is intensity, and it's absolutely true. But if you're just letting the weight fall down so you can press it back up again, you're only getting half of the mechanical tension on the muscle. Because if it's just falling through the air with minimal control, you're not really using the working muscle, are you? You're just letting gravity fold its way down, and your body will just do whatever's efficient when that load comes down, which is it'll probably take it a bit with the bicep, a bit with the shoulder, and then a bit with the chest as well. Same with this, you'll just absolutely compile into yourself here and not think about stretching out the muscle. So these exercises have been around for the longest period of time, but you need to use them correctly and use them with a slower tempo. The next thing you want to make sure you do is just go through a full range of motion. What's the working muscle you're trying to hit? Quads. Cool. Well, if I can get my hamstring to touch my calf, then I'm going to get a good stretch on my quads. Therefore, range of motion has been ticked off. Therefore, we're in a good position with this. Another point to consider is the arm path. That also kind of goes hand in hand with the range of motion and hand in hand with focusing on the working muscle. If I was to put my feet really far wide, that can work for some people. But what will happen is my hip joint will max out well before I'm able to get my knee joint to max out. Therefore, I'm not going to get as much challenge on the quads. This is why a leg press is pretty good. But the only downside with a leg press is your hip joint always closes up, i.e. quads meet the chest, well before the knee joint can close up. Therefore, that's why you get good glutes from a leg press and decent quads. But something like a hack squat, you can fully close that knee joint up as much as possible. And dare I say it, my hip joint isn't fully closed up here. If you look at the angle, if this was stood upright, like if you look at where my quad is to where my chest is, I could probably get it back a little bit further. But my knee joint is fully closed up here at the bottom. Whenever you're training your chest, because I feel like this has always been a hard one for me to contract, and therefore maybe you may think the same. Whenever you're training your chest, think about pulling your upper arm back behind the body. Now, if you were to do it where your arm is up into this position, in fact, allow me to just expand the camera. If you were here and you come back, you can only get so far. If you bring your elbow a little bit closer down at 45 degrees, and then look how much further back you can get there. So, and bear in mind your chest starts here, runs across, and inserts onto your upper arm. So the further you can pull back your upper arm, the more of a stretch you're going to get. If you're using something like a dumbbell and a barbell, you're going to want max stretch on the pecs because it's harder at the length and position. So when you can get the steady tempo, and the tempo is really there so you can execute the next 2 points, going through a full range safely, and then also using the arm path correctly, making sure that the ankle, hip, and the knee joint are aligned with this. And because of the sheer elevation of this platform, you're going to get ankle mobility is not going to be an issue. Therefore, you can fully focus on closing that knee joint up. When you can get those 3 things in alignment and you also send it with intensity, there's no way you're not going to grow, providing you know what you did last time and you beat it this time round, which is obviously probably the hardest bit. Make sure you track and record things so you know what you're doing. Now, you'll find your groove with this. You don't have to be bolt rigid and anal about it. You don't have to be counting 3 seconds down for every rep. You don't have to fully make sure you feel your hamstring to your calf every rep. Your foot position, you're always going to base up, and you're going to standardize that. But with that, you're going to find your groove with it. You don't need to find the balance between like standardizing the tempo, the range of motion, and the arm path, and then training hard. Because training hard is how you're truly going to grow new muscle. Having a training partner that pushes you, having someone that's there that's going to make you go that extra rep. That's what's going to grow true muscle, but you're doing it built on the base foundations of the 3 points I just mentioned. Once you do that, these exercises that have been around for the longest period of time, you'll realize how good of a tool they are for growing good, solid muscle, and you won't always need to rely on solid machines to use as well. So that's what I wanted to leave you with this video. Think of that when you're training. I want you to go into the gym and train like an absolute savage to beat what you did last time by looking at your logbook and making sure you beat it. And I'm looking out to the pool right now, and there's a real fat kid over there. I think, how do people get people like that? But anyway, you want to make sure that the foundation is set on those 3 points. Then you train really hard. And I said in the last video, it's all about intensity, but I want to make sure you do it safely with these 3 points as well. So hopefully you found this video of value. If you did, subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you tomorrow.